And there was one time, actually, that I got to be on a panel presenting with Werner Erhard. And that was an event in New York that was going to be held at Madison Square Garden called 2 Days That Can Change Your Life. This was put together by Jerry Rubin. You remember Jerry, who was very famous for being a political activist. But he later married Mimi Leonard, who was George Leonard's daughter. He's one of the founders of Esalen. And Jerry got very immersed in the personal growth movement and was an entrepreneur. So he put together this big extravaganza. It was George Leonard was there, Werner Erhard, Jerry, of course. Dick Gregory was on the bill. Wayne Dyer was on the bill. So unfortunately, there was one of those strikes in New York that happened all the time back in the 70s. It was either a newspaper strike or a transit strike. I can't remember which one it was, but it really cut into enrollment. And so they couldn't fill up Madison Square Garden. And they held it instead in a high school auditorium in Manhattan. Right? So I got to the high school auditorium in the morning, and Jerry meets me, and he says, Matt, because of the change of venue, we really have to change everything around, so there's not really room for you on the program anymore. So, I kind of got it. I was the least famous person on the thing. But 9 o'clock rolls up, and they're having technical problems with the sound. And Jerry comes running up to me, he goes like, the natives are getting restless, go out there and do something. So I went out and, in front of the curtain, and I did like 20 minutes of really fun play, game stuff that was just great. I mean, it was just fantastic energy between me and the audience. And so because of that, I got to be in the press conference with all the other presenters. And yay, and People magazine was there, and Time magazine was there, and we answered questions. So Tuesday morning, People magazine is coming out, and I wake up really early, and I run to the newsstand, and I open it up, and there's a picture of me and Wayne Dyer making faces at each other, and it says Master of Playfulness Matt Weinstein teaches Wayne Dyer how to have some fun. Yeah. Of course, they got that Master of Playfulness line from my own press release that I had handed out, right? But, that gave me the permission to say Master of Playfulness People magazine for the next 15 years, right? Thursday morning, Time magazine is coming out, right? I can hardly sleep, I'm so excited. So I go up early in the morning, I go to the newsstand, I pick it up, I turn to the place where they're writing the article. Here's how the article starts.
Man of the year.
Man of the year, exactly, on the cover. Not quite. The article starts, the two-day event was opened by a short, bouncy loudmouth. A short, bouncy loudmouth, First of all, what do they mean by bouncy? Fortunately, they did not mention my name, So Time magazine, whoosh, right. 2 weeks later, I get to be part of this other really fantastic conference. This conference called The Healing Powers of Laughter and Play, a conference for healthcare professionals. And the headliners are two comedians whose sons are also physicians on a panel together. Sid Caesar, Steve Allen, Rick Caesar, his son, and Steve Jr., his son, who are physicians, and they called it Healing Entertainers and Entertaining Healers. And it was a fabulous panel, really great. And the other headliner was Norman Cousins. I don't know if you remember Norman Cousins. He was the editor of the Saturday Review, and he had a debilitating nerve illness, ankylosing spondylosis. And he had this theory that endorphins, the body's natural painkillers, were produced during laughter and play. So with his doctor's permission, he checked himself out of the hospital into a hotel room. He rented Candid Camera reruns, Marx Brothers movies, and he literally laughed himself back to health. And he wrote a fabulous book about it called Anatomy of an Illness as Perceived by the Patient. Right? So we got along really well, Norman Cousins and I, and as a result of being on that conference, about a month later, we were invited to go on the Phil Donahue show to talk about the healing powers of laughter and play. So again, we got along great, so when it comes time for me to write my new brochure, I write to Norman Cousins and I say, can you give me a little testimonial? So here's what he writes back. He writes, when I think about Matt Weinstein's work, I'm reminded of the immortal words of Marconi as he invented the radio. What hath God wrought? So at first I thought, this is kind of cool. What hath God wrought, right? But the more I thought of it, I was like, is this a compliment or an insult? But first of all, I knew it was a lot better than a short, bouncy loudmouth. So I put it on my new brochure, and you know, I was an entrepreneur like all of you in those days, so I took my brochure and I sent it to Norman Cousins' very prestigious lecture agent. And I call him up. I say, well, you know, Norman and I both talk about the healing powers of laughter and play, and he's a very, very expensive speaker, but, you know, maybe you'll have someone call up and they want Norman Cousins and they can't afford him, and you can switch him over to me. And he says to me, young man, he says, when people call me looking for Norman Cousins, they are looking for one of the 5 greatest living Americans. I hardly think you would suffice as a substitute. And I say to him, well, it might interest you to know that I was recently profiled in Time magazine. And he says to me, you know, I think I read something about that. What exactly do they mean by bouncy? Of course, you know, this happened a long time ago. I might not have all the details exactly right on this one.